Welcome to today's online tutorial. I've been away for a little while, so just want to get back into looking at some things in Photoshop. So some people have been asking me in the classes I teach about infrared photography because it's a difficult subject, and it's, especially with digital equipment, it's difficult to obtain infrared images unless you do something physically with your camera, which I'll talk about in a moment. There are ways that you can get this to work for you. Mostly I find it's actually easier to do it with color images than it is with black and white images. I find if I'm trying to edit images, traditional digital images that I've taken, and convert them into a black and white image that looks infrared, you never manage to kind of capture the exact look of what it looks like in black and white. It's really difficult. And of course there's specialized film for that, with that normally comes with a filter as well. But there are ways to do it with your digital camera as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. But for today's tutorial, I'm going to look at doing it with a color image. So when we think about digital images, we're going to be looking at images like this. So images, so this image here where the foliage turns pink is taken with an infrared camera with a certain type of filter, or the sensor has been filtered for a certain type of light. So I'm just going to be looking at that particular way of converting your image, where you get these deep kind of pinkish reddish hues and the foliage, and make your sky a little bit darker. So it is pretty straightforward to do it in Photoshop. So what we use, or what we can use for this, is we go back to Photoshop. We can easily just go down to our layer panel here and just choose hue saturation. So we have our hue saturation panel here. From here we can control individual color channels. So we have here the master, which is all colors, and we don't want to edit all colors together. So we can choose one of the color channels. You've got your reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas. And of course, there'll be some crossovers with each. So if we first start thinking about editing our greens, for instance. So we know that green becomes this pink color. We know from that image that we looked at. So we have green foliage here in the trees, and we have it in the grass. So how might I go around converting that? So I can use this slider here, so the hue slider, and I have here at the top bar. So you've got your top bar here, which shows the current color range that you're going to change. So this is the greens, and it stretches kind of to the yellows. So you see here there's a white straight line. So these are the colors that it will affect 100%. And then between the straight line and the arrow, it will have a certain fall off to how it affects those colors in that range. So it's just to give smooth transitions. And if this becomes too close, then the transitions are less, so you might end up getting jagged edges in your digital file. So let's look at just, first of all, let's try and see what happens if we do something with this. We don't see very much of a change here. A little bit in the grass, but not really very much is kind of going on. We've opened up that color range to pink now, but I might want to extend that range a little bit, and I can do that just by dragging this. So if I drag this over, I can kind of extend the range. I have to be careful how far I go, because it's also affecting the colors in the sky here. Or I can drag this as well to affect the range. But again, like I said, you have to be careful, or you get, this happens, you get jagged edges, and we want to avoid that. So I can also drag it this way and see if that looks a little bit better. So if I drag that maybe further into our yellows, and again, just checking, okay, yeah, maybe this direction is giving us more kind of those pink hues that we're after. So that looks good. So yeah, so the foliage now looks pretty good. And of course you can experiment with dragging these to see what type of effects you get. But we're going to go for, yeah, that kind of pinkish magenta color. Of course, if you want, you can lower the saturation if you think it's too strong, or heighten it. and then you can, get it to be lighter or darker, depending on what you feel is a more realistic look for what you're after. So that's the green. So then the sky, if we want to affect the sky, we're going to be looking at our cyans and our blues. So I can start out by looking at the cyan range, so you can see the range it's going to affect, and we can start playing with our colours a little bit. We still want to, I guess, maintain that type of cyan in the sky, but it's a different type of cyan, as we saw from the image we looked at. It's a bit kind of slightly off, almost cross-processed like. So the cyan itself doesn't seem to be having an effect, so maybe we can also check in the blue range, and that has more of an effect. So yeah, so we can go around and you can get some pretty crazy looks. Different infrared adjustments may look differently depending on the infrared image and how it has had the kind of wavelengths of light that it captures. But we're kind of we want this kind of semi-cross process look in the sky. And again, you can play with your saturation. I'm going to turn my saturation down a bit. So we've got that off, almost turquoise look in the sky. And again, we can play with our lightness. We can make it lighter, or we can make it darker. And quite often, sometimes the skies can be quite dark in these infrared images. So we've done that. So just with two simple adjustments, we've adjusted our blue channel and we've adjusted our green channel, and we've got a very kind of close infrared style look if we compare it to the image we looked at here. Not as pink, but pretty close to it. And you can see quite often, if we look through some more of these infrared color images, the hues tend to differ. So these particular ones, which were taken by Richard Moss, where he's got these kind of pinkish looks as well. So if we go back in between these, we can see, if I go back to Photoshop, we can adjust this as well if we want the color to be kind of more pink, and perhaps you want to reduce the lightness of it as well. So you can play around with the saturation of it. So, if, as I was talking about before, you want to do this with black and white, it can be a little bit more difficult. I can use a black and white adjustment in the black. If I turn this layer off here, in my black and white adjustments in Photoshop, it does have a pre-built-in infrared option. But you can see it doesn't get anywhere close to the look of infrared. The blue should be probably darker. Certainly the green should be whiter, even much whiter than this. And if I start pushing stuff even further, it will start breaking. I'll start getting banding and jagged edges in places, so you don't get 100% the look maybe that you're after. Maybe you can do a little bit more with editing, but it can often be quite difficult, if not impossible. So in those cases, what is normally recommended is, if we go back to the internet here, and there's a good article on Outdoor Photographer. So this article covers converting your camera to infrared. Now, of course, you may not want to convert your camera to an infrared camera, because once you do that, that's it. It's converted. There's no going back. What a lot of photographers do is if they have an old digital camera, a spare digital camera that they're not using anymore, they send it off and they will convert it. So normally that involves somehow removing filters. There's filters across the sensor that filter out infrared light. And infrared light is normally strongest when the sun is the highest in the sky. So they can do this for you. It's not something you can necessarily do yourself. There are different types of adjustments, and you can see here Outdoor Photography has outlined them. So it just depends on, I think it depends on the wavelength, how sensitive you want it to be to the different wavelengths of infrared. So you can specify that. So yeah, so that's it. So that was just a brief look at how to convert your color images to something kind of close to or appearing to be infrared images in Photoshop. Thank you for watching. If you like the video, please consider subscribing to the channel or like it. And also, if you have any other information or opinions on infrared photography, please feel free to add them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching.